Welcome to the Happiness on Tap podcast. I'm your host, Leann Herron, and my guest today, Jeff Jones, has spent his career inside the addiction recovery world as a licensed professional counselor, a certified addiction counselor, interventionist, and family nutritional recovery life coach. Despite all of his amazing credentials, Jeff kept returning to two deeply human questions he's carried since childhood. How do people actually get better? And how do families contribute to the solution? Those questions led him to write his new book, Rethinking Addiction, the New Family Recovery Solution, where he introduces a groundbreaking three-phase system-based approach that treats addiction as a complex, whole person and whole family condition or problem. Jeff, welcome to the show. I am so excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Leann. I'm excited too. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
I appreciate you sharing all of the wonderful things that you are doing in this area. For decades, addiction recovery has focused almost exclusively on the individual struggling with substance use, often leaving families overwhelmed, blamed, or shut out of the process entirely. What if addiction recovery isn't about the individual, but about healing the entire family system? Today, we're unpacking how healing relationships, addressing biological, environmental root causes, and integrating modern tools can radically change recovery outcomes for everyone involved. So let's get started. Jeff, you have held many respected roles in the addiction recovery space. What gaps did you start noticing that led you to question traditional models?
Yeah. Well, many gaps, but let me just start with one. And so when I was a young professional and working in treatment centers, one of the things that staff in a treatment center does is about once a week, they debrief clients. And I would be listening to other addiction professionals talk about clients in the treatment centers. And I was reminded of communication patterns that I grew up in, essentially. In the family that I grew up in, I was reminded of these communication patterns. And essentially, the gap is I learned that the language that we still use to talk about addiction is shaming. It starts with how we think about addiction, how we speak about addiction, which is why the name of the book is Rethinking Addiction. But in listening to other professionals debrief, it was like I started to feel that the problem that we were trying to prevent was actually being reinforced by the language other professionals were using, like addict, codependent, enabler. I mean, that's all common language in the addiction recovery space. And in my mind, that sets up a power over dynamic. And it's more like focusing on or projecting like the glass is half empty as opposed to the glass is half full. So in my thinking and in my language, and this has taken me years to change my own thinking, I have learned to separate the addiction, which I see as an entity, from the actual essence or personhood of the individual who has it. And so it's learning to separate these in my thinking first, which is what I teach families, and then how to actually talk differently to address addiction, have strong boundaries, all of the stuff that we know, but stay connected with the essence of our addicted family members.
You don't think about it because, like you said, those words, addict, codependent, enabler, those seem to be like the words that have just been put out there for so long. We, the family member, are the enabler. They are the addict. And when you do that, it's almost like when a therapist or a doctor gives an individual a diagnosis, that becomes their identity.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I love that you realized that was happening.
Just a little offshoot here to follow up on what you're saying is even the language like addiction is a family disease. It's like, hey, I've been around long enough to know that before that language came around, addiction in the family created stress induced roles. And there's a lot of research for that, but we don't see them as stress induced roles. We see it that family members have a disease, which it's a very short jump with a disease to pharmaceutical solutions.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I just think that it, like you said, it starts with a negative language.
Yes.
So, like you said, the glass half full versus the glass half empty. And the way that we speak to people is going to make such a huge impact on their recovery. You know, if we
Yes.
treat
I
someone like a person and not like an addict.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the other side of that is there are people who feel empowered when they call themselves an addict. And if they truly do feel empowered, that's their choice. But it makes no sense for me to reference them like that because from my perspective, it's this power over, and I'm doing everything I can to have horizontal communication as opposed to vertical power over.
And I think that is so powerful in the way that you have identified it and the way that you have changed how you communicate with people. When you were talking about being a child and growing up in a certain home environment, um, and feeling that's I think when we have time to really as an adult go back and look at that and make conscious choices about how we communicate with ourselves, with each other,
Yeah,
based on our past, that's how change happens.
absolutely. You nailed it.
So, in your book, Rethinking Addiction, the New Family Recovery Solution, you mention how these two childhood questions, how do people actually get better? And how do families contribute to the solution, drove you to write this book? What answers did you uncover that surprised you the most?
Wow. Well, first, I want to back up just a touch and talk about a metaphor or a model that I learned from one of my mentors. That is, if we imagine a three-legged stool, and each leg, like we need each leg of the stool to have a stable stool. And if we're only addressing two legs, then the stool's less stable. So the three legs are, one is biopsychosocial, another is spiritual, and those legs are addressed by a lot of self-help programs, by a lot of treatment. And then the leg that isn't addressed is in addiction, it's disordered neurochemistry. In recovery, that leg is bionutritional support. And that is the leg that I see that is missing. So, in answering the question here, how do people actually get better? When I took some trainings from my addiction nutrition mentor, Christina, who has the Academy for Mental Health and Addiction Nutrition, it turned my world upside down because it really brought in new information to me about imbalanced neurotransmitters and how amino acids could balance them. Also, her website, eatingproteinsaves.lives.org, has quite a bit of information on there about a pro recovery food plan. And one of the things that I've seen happen over and over, and this is just anecdotal, Leann, but it's ever since I've learned this, when someone relapses, I will always ask them, so what did you have for breakfast? So what did you eat that day? Or when was the last time you ate before that relapse? And 100% of the time, which only, that for me right now, that may represent 20 some people. So not a lot, but 100% of the time, they either said, I never thought about that. Well, that day I didn't eat, or that day I had a little thing for breakfast and then I relapsed at 4 o'clock or whatever. But one of the things I've learned from Christina is eating protein on a regular basis helps the brain work better. And when the brain works better, they are going to have a much better chance to use those recovery skills when they're in an environment where they may get triggered and it may seem like a good idea to have a drink, or I can just have one, and all that kind of stuff. So the Academy for Mental Health and Addiction Nutrition was huge for me. Also, the Alliance for Addiction Solutions has a lot of information on their website that is the actual research that supports that. And Christina has a lot of information on her website about scientific research too. But all of that research has just been brushed under the table or buried or something. So that was one of the first kind of aha things for me. However, the other question, how do families contribute to the solution? Well, the actual book and the table of contents is the sequence, kind of a learning process that families can go through to really answer that question. What I want to say is this is not for the faint of heart. I'm not offering some black and white solution. You just do this and everything will be fine. This is a transformational program, transformational process for the family member. They make their change. When they make their change, they are in a much better position to change how they end of the communication and behavior with their addicted loved one. So it's kind of like this narrow focus on the person with the addiction. Of course, that is important. I am not saying that's not important, but I am saying it is also necessary to include a larger picture, to be able to focus on the individual, but then also expand and take a look at what all's around them. For instance, the first thing is the family and patterns that happen in the family. And it's a whole system.
Yeah, thank you for going into both of those. I'm with you on nutrition. I think it's so valuable for us to be educated in understanding the value of things like protein and how it feeds the brain. As we get older, understanding all of the things that impact our brain, if we're trying to mitigate dementia or just live long, healthy lives.
Yeah.
As I mentioned to you, I've had many family members with addiction that have either passed away or are still living in addiction. My father was an alcoholic diabetic. And so, me understanding the importance of nutrition for him for his diabetes, I think
Blood
made
sugar.
huge impacts, making sure that he was eating correctly and monitoring his blood sugar levels
Right.
that kind of helped avoid those relapses. Although they happened, I can't say one way or another that that was directly or indirectly related. But for me, it was that knowledge, that education, and understanding how alcohol itself affects blood sugar. And so it was educating myself and educating him.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So one thing I want to say, I mentioned the website eatingproteinsaveslives.org. On that website, and I think it's been changed, but there is a pretty significant PDF on there that connects alcoholism to hypoglycemia, the blood sugar spikes that you're mentioning there. There's information out there about that, and it's optimal to learn that sooner rather than later.
I also like how you set up your book to provide education. I think that's the greatest value for us is being educated in family patterns. So having um, a family holiday and trying to get people together and how those patterns affect the addict. I think the more that we know about ourselves and our patterns, um,
Yes.
is the best thing for us as individuals anyway. But I think that is very valuable for being part of how we can help contribute to the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's super important what you just said about understanding patterns of behavior, patterns of communication, and just patterns of information that has trickled down over generations from the culture into a family to their children, to their children's children.
Absolutely. I think for me during my healing journey and learning to understand myself better was learning how to look at my family history
Yeah.
to understand my mother, my mother's mother. And it really went to show that communication or lack thereof communication
Yes.
because things were swept under the rug, things weren't discussed. As the
Yes.
child of an alcoholic, um, those conversations didn't happen in the home.
Right. Yes.
And
I am
so
familiar.
it's so important that we look to understanding and researching our lineage, our family for ourselves.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Can you explain what you mean by a system based view of addiction and why focusing slowly on the individual falls short?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that I want to say is the traditional view of addiction recovery is just focusing on that one person. And the thinking there is they have the problem. And if they were just to do something about it or admit it's a problem or go into detox or go into treatment and they fixed it themselves, then the family could go back to normal and everything would be fine. But that is a myth because if the family goes back to normal, they recreate the same communication patterns, behavioral patterns that were present when the addiction was growing from mild to moderate to severe. So if the family doesn't see this and understand it, and it isn't about the family being wrong, it is about the family having an impact from the addiction. And the impact often is family members need to change how they're caring, their concern, their love, because when we see a family member who is struggling, who's having a hard time, it's only natural to want to help them. So these behaviors to help, and the helping can be enabling old patterns that reinforce addiction, or when family members kind of see this larger picture and they can start to make change within themselves. They can be enabling health within themselves. They can be enabling health within their communication with their addicted family member. They can be enabling health with how their whole family communicates and how their whole family does family together. So, what I'm suggesting here is more than just a black and white solution. The norm here is that about 94% of the people who are addicted do not get help. Families are on the front line. They see this. If we did not shame them, if families understood this larger picture and it wasn't their fault, and I'm not saying that families have done everything right because they are living under quite a bit of stress. Their nervous system has been activated over and over, or maybe so much that their nervous system does not come down to calm anymore. And family members lay awake at night, can't sleep, and their thinking just gets them more and more concerned. So that's the traditional approach, the why focusing solely on the individual falls short. And so a systems perspective isn't going to forget about that, isn't going to discount that. It is going to acknowledge that if we keep relating to our addicted loved one the same way over and over, we are going to inadvertently reinforce old patterns that enable addiction. The systemic perspective here is for families to consider how they've been impacted and then what they can do to enable health within inside their own body and to focus on both. So fluid focus of attention, the individual and what's happening inside of them and what's happening inside of their family. And there's the whole fluid focus of attention that is a practice in itself. But what I'm explaining, I think, is a doable, not for everybody, but for people with a growth mindset. And they are probably have tried everything else. And if they haven't tried everything else, what I'm talking about may sound too much. Like, I don't want to do that much work. I didn't cause this problem. They did. It's their fault. They need to deal with it. I get it. Like, I'm not telling people they need to change, but what I'm saying is if what you've been doing has not been getting you the results that you desire, know that there's another way to do this, which is what I'm talking.
I absolutely love everything you mentioned in that. Um, you know, I want to say I only recently started learning more about my own nervous system, and that I had spent this lifetime, probably the first 45 years of my life, in nervous system dysregulation, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. I never realized that I didn't know how to come to calm. I didn't understand my nervous system. I had just lived it for so long. I thought that was normal. And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
when I started healing and started educating myself on my own nervous system, I could understand those triggers, whether it
Yes.
was a
Yes. Yes.
discussion about a family member who was suffering with addiction and how I was responding or reacting to that conversation, or my hyper focus on the frustration or the blame or the shame
Yeah.
versus, what can I do differently to calm my
Yeah.
nervous system and
Yes.
share tools with other family members so that as a whole, we are growing healthier and we're
Yeah.
understanding those things.
I want to drop another little resource here for your listeners and about the nervous system and specifically how our nervous system in relationship, how it operates and it's a little, I think, 9-minute video or something. The science behind it is from Dr. Stephen Porges. And if you were to go to YouTube and type in polyvagal cartoon, you would see this very cute little cartoon. And of all of the resources that I've had, I have gotten the most feedback. That cartoon is the best. And when I'm working with like the hub person in a family and asking them to trickle out information to other people in the family, this is one of the most powerful little videos, and it's a cartoon. And so I just want to invite people, go to YouTube, type in polyvagal cartoon, listen to it, and see what makes sense here for you. And with what you're talking about, Leann, and it's the communication in the family and being aware of our own activation in our own body. It's just a very cute resource. I've seen it a number of times, and in 9 minutes, it packs in so much information. Every time I look at it, I kind of get a new aha moment.
I'll agree 100%. I know exactly the video you're talking about. I have shared it with people as well, and I will definitely link to it in our show notes. I just had this
Awesome.
conversation with my daughter, explaining to her because I've been following and doing a lot of courses with Dr. Amy Apigian on the biology of trauma.
Yeah.
For me, it was this visual representation in the information she would provide that I could look at understanding where my parasympathetic calm is, what happens when I go into fight flight, what happens when I drop
Yeah.
into freeze. That really helped me understand myself because then there was, oh, okay, I understand now why I'm experiencing anxiety and hypervigilance and
Yeah.
where those things came from because I had spent a lifetime pushing those things down, denying them, ignoring them. And now I'm able to befriend them and understand them and sit with them because I'm focused on learning and sitting with my emotions, my feelings, my thoughts, and where are these coming from and asking these questions. And it wasn't until I started learning about the biology of trauma and polyvagal
Yeah.
that I had no knowledge of these things. So it's
Right.
such a blessing that these things are out and available for people to understand. And I know that Stephen is also now teaching. I see it come up a lot on LinkedIn. And so I think it's just so valuable that we now have access to what almost seems like new information.
Dr. Amy Pigian stuff is really wonderful, and her book goes very deep. It's very academic,
Hmm.
and she's wonderful. And yeah, this is a great conversation because I'm talking to an educated person here, and I have done a lot of podcasts with people that don't know a lot about addiction. And I get very different questions than this, Leann. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have the book. I love it. And while you said it's very academic, it's also the examples that she shares of her clients that she's worked with. That's what drew me in. In fact, it was like one of the very first examples of a lady who ended up becoming a life coach.
Huh.
And her husband has the same name as my husband. It was almost like reading my story in her book. And so just how she wrote it, the
Yeah.
examples and the way she explains it is so easy to follow and understand. I've had other
Yes.
conversations with academic researchers and I feel like they're speaking far above my head that I don't really connect with them.
Right.
But I think it opens that door for me to want to learn more. And so having these
Yes.
conversations, I think it's great. Like I said, I really connected the minute you started talking about nervous system regulation and how we can share that information within our family
Yes.
unit.
Yes.
And that's why I bring people here on the podcast, because I think the more that we can share this information with the greater world, the more people that we can help.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to talk about one of the things that I remember experiencing as the child of an addict. Many families are told to practice tough love. Why can that approach sometimes increase harm or relapse rather than support recovery?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one, I want to say I'm not a big fan of tough love. On the other side of that is, I would say probably, 12, 15 years ago, I had a friend who used tough love, and it was very helpful for her. And to put this in context, my friend was small, petite woman, and she didn't have a real high self esteem of herself. So she was a little bit mousy. And the tough love concept allowed her to stand in her power, which I think that really caught her son's attention. So it was helpful for her. The other side of that is how it can bring harm is it has the potential to drive a wedge between the family and the person in addiction and have pretty strong ultimatums. And the harm that can come from it is the addicted individual can feel that they are even more alone, and they end up ending their life. So this is pretty high stakes.
Yeah, thank you. If you don't mind, I'd like to share two little short personal stories just to show the negative impact of that tough love. Because without knowledge or just thinking that that's going to help someone and not really
Hmm.
considering the damage. I have one little story that it was great. My daughter at 18 decided to leave home and go to another city with friends and thought, of course, she knew better and life was going to be great. And she ended up getting addicted to meth, getting involved with the
Mm,
wrong crowd, and ended up doing jail time for her choices. Here I am in New Mexico and she's in Arizona. And for me, it was that tough love because I would get postcards from her from jail talking about how great it was, these connections she was making with these women in jail, and it was wonderful. And oh, could I send her money to put on her books? And could I do this? And accepting these long distance phone calls that were just outrageous. And I had
mm,
to practice some tough love. Honestly, my daughter is 36 now, and she will tell you every day that that was what she needed. Because as soon as I
nice.
stopped providing and contributing and supporting her in
Yeah.
that way, she had to walk that hard road. She had to detox. She had to do her time. And when she was done doing her time and she was clean and she was ready to change her future, then I was there to help set her on a different path. And she never went back to her addiction.
Yeah.
She has a wonderful, great paying job and she's married and has a child. And we talk about it all the time that had I not made that choice for tough love, who knows what direction
Yeah.
her life may have went.
Right.
So I have
Right.
this one part that really turned out beautiful and it could have went another direction. The other story I want to share is my ex-husband. I was married for 20 years. 10 years of that, my ex-husband became addicted to opiates through pain management. And after having tried everything to support him, we just kind of hit an impasse. And I had hit a point where it was becoming violent and my children weren't safe and I had to make decisions. And I thought that ultimatum, as you mentioned earlier, was the last ditch effort. Like if I give him an ultimatum, you have so long to make a change or we're leaving you.
Yeah.
It had a very negative effect on him. And it almost came to suicide. Instead, he chose a very dark direction, um, with at a point where he was home alone with one of my children. And he pulled out a gun and asked my child to pick the bullet, and he would kill himself if I didn't want him there. And for my child blames me for that tough love, that ultimatum that I didn't
Yeah.
stay to change things. And so I think it can go in a very negative direction.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Leanne, for sharing those two stories. And because a concept, like any concept, it isn't a do all end all solution for everyone, because there's a whole context that this addiction is happening. There's a unique body, genetically, environmentally, resilience wise, to handle stressors. It's like there's so many factors that are unique that play into this. And that really understanding that there's a lot of factors, not that every family member needs to understand everything, but it is important for every family member to be aware when black and white thinking is coming up for them and they automatically want to believe it's all true, you know? And what I really got from your story is that you knew your daughter well enough, your intuition said, I need to go this way and not that way, you know? And a big part of this, like, this is a spiritual process. However you define spirituality, this is a spiritual process for family members. And so them having foundational support of, if it's a religion for them, if it's a spirituality, or for me in this program, I use a lot of divine law principles, but actually to have a foundation that people can lean into for support. And it isn't like that is the only support they need, but that is inner support for them. Of course, like support groups, friends that listen and don't just tell them what to do. That's super important here. The other aspect that I would like your listeners to hear is that with black and white thinking and traditional addiction recovery and even AA, everything is about telling that person what to do. And of course, there are times when that is necessary. But if that is a full-time diet of telling someone what to do, it is going to be a power over relationship. You know, people are going to get burned out. They're going to get stressed out. And if they do that for years, that stress is going to be in their body and it's going to largely come out through their GI tract, IBS symptoms. And Gabor Mate researched a lot of this in his book, When the Body Says No. So this isn't something I'm just making up. I'm kind of remembering his book, his research, and, you know, that people are different and getting out of our old patterns, however we used to relate to our loved one, whether that's our spouse or our child. Once addiction comes in and it has gone from mild, moderate to severe, like the family member, if they do not change their patterns of loving and care and concern, they can inadvertently enable old patterns that reinforce addiction and not know it.
Yeah, absolutely. You shared another great resource. I'm very fond of Gabor Mate and his books. It's been such valuable information for me, just in understanding. It just provides
Yeah.
such a great level of understanding. And it kind of leads into my next question. Your model in your book includes a strong biological and holistic focus. So
Yeah.
nutrition, trauma, and the environment, it's all these pieces, not just this, small focus. Why are these factors so overlooked in recovery?
Wow. Now there's the $1,000,000 question. And yes, first thing I want to say is I don't have the black and white do all end all answer for this. There's some things that I can shine light on and say, now, isn't this curious? But that is a really good question. And the biological and holistic focus that I learned from Christina and also with the Alliance for Addiction Solutions, that it just took me a number of years for me to shift my thinking there. But probably the reason why a lot of this is overlooked, how, well, for one, addiction, there's no one definition of addiction. There's many definitions of addiction. However, it's a disease. And it became a disease, I think, back in the 80s. And there was a lot of good things about it becoming a disease. And one of the main ones at that time was that third-party payers, i.e. insurance companies, could pay for treatment if it was classified as a disease. The other thing, and I mentioned this before, when it was classified as a disease, it was also seen as there was less potential for stigma, which is true in some cases, and in some cases, probably not. But the other part of it is addiction. The solution to addiction got medicalized pretty heavy. So when addiction became a disease, the people that deal with diseases are academically trained as medical doctors. So the medical model of addiction is doctors have the answer, and doctors are trained to address symptoms with medications. That's what they do. And in some cases, that can be helpful, and in other cases, not so much. Some cases, using pharmaceutical medications as a first line of defense, they are using a substance which is toxic and potentially addictive as a first line of defense, as opposed to nutraceuticals or amino acids, supplements, and herbs and a nutrient dense diet as a first line of defense. And that's non toxic and non addictive. So, in my mind, why not start with that? But going back to the training of the doctors, it's like when addiction is a disease and doctors are the ones to handle diseases, and they can only suggest or prescribe how they're trained, and they're trained in the medical model, i.e. pharmaceuticals as a first line of defense, a lot of people don't really understand that some doctors go to school after they get an MD, and there are doctors that are naturopathic doctors, and those doctors address root causes of symptoms. So that's a significant difference. And I think that really begins to answer the question that you asked me, why are these factors so overlooked? Because the other side of this is we live in a capitalistic country, which we all know that. And it is almost like every system needs to produce an income. And so the healthcare system can, and I want to be careful how I say this, Leann, but it can move towards profit over people's health. And that's the gist. And I'm up on a soapbox. And I want to say back in October of 23, I had pneumonia. I went into a hospital, and those pharmaceuticals and steroids saved Jeff's life. So I have an opinion, and my opinion is, as a first line of defense, use amino acids and supplements and nutrient dense food and herbs and all that kind of stuff. And the pharmaceuticals can be a second line of defense. And in my own situation in October of 23, I was quite stubborn because I was not thinking well with pneumonia. I let it go on too long. So I do have a bias. That said, anybody who I work with, I get to know what their values are, what foundational supports they have to make their best decisions, and I support them to do that regardless whether that aligns with my bias or not.
Man, you really covered a lot of information that was so important from the start of understanding it, addiction as being categorized as a disease, what that led to, insurance companies being able to then pay for treatment, also understanding the capitalistic world that we're in and understanding that's how doctors get paid is they get
Right,
paid to prescribe these medications. Also, lack of, I don't want to say lack of education because they received a certain education when they went to medical school. But some of the
right.
older doctors have not stepped out of that little area of this is the education that I have. Anything outside of this information maybe is going to change how I think or feel or and so yeah, I like you said, looking at the alternatives first.
Yeah,
And this is what truly helped me. And I'm going to try not to get on my own soapbox because it is so very easy to do that based on our own experience. When I was in trauma response, I went to my primary care and asked for a referral to a therapist. That's all I wanted. And her response was to hand me a prescription for an antidepressant. And so
yes.
I left there without the prescription and without a referral. And I was blessed with a community that introduced me to an herbalist. And so, I went to her and talked to her about what my symptoms were: brain fog, memory loss, anxiety, hypervigilance, depression, panic, all of these things. And she heard me. She saw me. She talked to me about my history. She talked to me about my values and my beliefs. And then she talked to me about herbs and certain herbs that she could blend into teas to really help calm my nervous system.
Yeah,
And to me, this was
nice.
like magic, like the sky parted open and this light came down. And here was this person who spent time with me, getting to know me and
Right.
provided me tools that could help me. And that was my start of going to an alternative medicine avenue for my own personal treatment and healing. And so from her, then she was treating me through certain teas and tinctures and oils. And then she introduced me to a sound healer who she tended to
Yeah,
work together with. And so incorporating these other modalities that, like you said, aren't addictive, aren't destructive, provided me so much education to learn about herbs that are grown here locally. I can take a drive 20 minutes outside of my city into the mountains and pick these herbs that can help me, that made this tremendous change in my life. So that is the direction that I have chosen and why I practice such a holistic approach in my
yeah.
coaching as well.
Awesome.
Um, I don't want to be a band aid or a quick fix or lead to another diagnosis. I want to help you move forward with knowledge and education so that you can make informed decisions.
Yeah. Nice. Nice.
And
Well,
so,
I'm
yeah,
I'm glad I'm glad I'm having this conversation.
you are hitting it right on the head. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So let's talk about your three-phase program because I think that's something that can provide more information. Oh, it's practical tools to enable health within the body, practical tools for enabling health within your relationships, enabling health within your family. Can you walk us
Yeah.
through how families can really make positive change that can influence addiction?
So there's so much to this, and just know that I'm going to do a high level arc here, like hitting the mountain peaks kind of thing. So the beginning is actually understanding that we have had mixed messages about addiction for centuries. And anytime there are mixed messages, our mind automatically wants to go to have a solution because it's really hard to hold the tension of the opposites. And when we just get it like an immediate impulse and we think that's the whole truth, that's black and white thinking. And then in the book, I talk about both and thinking as the antidote to slow ourselves down. So slowing ourselves down, there's a number of different ways to do that. One we've talked about with the nervous system kind of stuff. And it can be herbs, it can be amino acids. There are many, many, many different ways to do this. So I have like one area of training on Christina's website, aminoacidtherapy.com. She has, I don't know, dozens of names and phone numbers on there of people that have gone through her program. So there's a lot of, and the herbalists that you ran into just coincidentally, I don't really believe there's anything like a coincidence, but that it's like for us to pay attention, like if we have a growth mindset and we start really accepting the fact that we have power to change, enabling health within our body on some level, things will show up and say yes. Sure, I have my whole, stuff about food and amino acids, and I'm not really going to get into that. That's in my book a little bit. It's on Christina's website, but it's coming up with a structure every day. Like when I get up in the morning, what are 3 things that I'm going to do to start my day? And it could be just sitting on the couch and petting my cat and listening to soft music, or reading an inspirational book for 10 minutes, or going for a walk, or doing exercise, or meditating, or doing, Tai Chi, or whatever we need to do to get our mindset in the right place to start our day in a way that we're excited, we're empowered. And it's like we're going into this in a good way. And throughout the day, have little reminders, check-ins, and then at the end of the day, have 3 things to start to calm our body down, to get ready for our body to rest. So having this protocol, so that's a big part of Enabling Health One. And in the 9-month program that I have, the first month is this enabling health within the body. Is it like you just do it for a month and then you're good to go? No, this is a lifestyle change. And you do it for the rest of your life, regardless of what your addicted family member does. And then enabling health within your relationships. In the book, I list like 4 or 5 different specific techniques. And I use the word techniques very deliberately because when we understand these patterns, we can actually begin to make changes from us having a reaction to our addicted family members' behavior to us slowing ourselves down and then having a response to our addicted family members' words or behavior. So know that there is a lot, there's some suggestions in that book. Now, the other thing that I want to say, are those black and white suggestions going to be a fit for every person in every context, in every stage of addiction? Well, no, they're not. However, Once I get to learn about a family member that I'm working with and what's happening with their addicted family member and what the communication and relationship is, I can nuance those suggestions in the book. And this is all about nuancing. This enabling health within the relationship stage, it's like planting seeds for the individual with addiction to consider a new conversation, a new perspective of recovery. This may happen and it may not happen. And I have been involved with some Zoom calls with some people who they're open to a new perspective of recovery, which includes, the nutraceuticals, the herbs, all this kind of stuff. But it's like a whole new conversation. And so I can be included in that in a Zoom call, or family members actually can be using these amino acids and herbs and supplements and regular nutrient dense food themselves, and they have an understanding of what it's done for them. And it might be helpful for them to share it with their loved one. Maybe yes, maybe no, but there's just a ton of possibilities here. And so I am not making a black and white claim. Yes, do this program, and I can guarantee that you'll get your loved one into treatment. That is not what I'm saying. I want to be really clear. There's more of a guarantee of own transformation. And when I say your own, I mean the family member, the hub family member that I'm working with for their transformation. And when they make transformation, they change their role in the family, how they talk, how they behave, and then that influences how the whole family does family together. Now, at this stage, if I have been working with the individual, like amino acid coaching and recovery coaching and all of that kind of stuff, one thing I have done is started structured facilitated meetings with the individual, and they present their goals to their family. Their family listens, there's dialogue. Then I go into mediator role. I've done a couple decades of mediation. So that is a whole nother possibility. And I've thought before, wow, treatment centers could have something like this set up, at discharge, to have structured communication, facilitated communication with the person who's just leaving the treatment center and the family. And I don't know why that hasn't happened. And I've thought about this and talked to enough people about it. I think some have tried it and it just hasn't ended well. And I know that the mediation role is not easy. It requires being neutral as best possible. And a lot of the people that work in treatment centers, they are in their own recovery. And so they have their own perspective, they have their own opinion. And so it's hard for them to be neutral. So that's kind of the short answer to why I wrote the whole book, Leann.
Actually, that was a great explanation of each phase and how you help families achieve change. And you were definitely speaking my love language from the very beginning, making these changes for ourselves from small micro change. Things for me that really helped me was waking up in the morning with a gratitude practice, spending just a few moments in bed before I even get out of bed and just having a
Yeah.
gratitude practice and then setting myself up for success. So for me, exercise or meditation, if I set myself up for success, that meant laying out my workout clothes, charging my music player, making sure my water bottle was
Yeah.
filled so that when I would get out of bed, I had no excuse. Okay, let's just put my clothes on, put my shoes on, Let's do this. Let's start my morning off on our best foot. Even if it's
Right.
10 minutes and that's all you can commit to it, it's 10 positive minutes. Choosing to listen to a podcast over music and letting my podcasts pick me, not me picking them. Like, what do I need today? But trusting that the universe is going to put in front of me what I need today. So setting myself up for success is a huge part of my day. Like you said, then in the middle of the day, having this presence in what you do and this focus, whether it's washing dishes and being present in that moment, whether it's cooking a meal and being present in that moment, it really helps change your perspective to,
Right.
wow, I'm preparing this amazing meal that's going to provide me nutrition. It's going to provide my family members nutrition, and we get to share this amazing meal together. And the gratitude, again, being thankful that I have this food available to cook this nutritious meal. And so it's, having that in place throughout the day. And then, like you said, at the end of the day, again, being thankful, being present, again, having gratitude, it just really helps set your day up. And when you start making those changes, people around you start to notice it. They start to feel that
Right.
change
Yes.
in you. They see the change in your physical appearance, in your mental health. And so it's that ability to drop that stone in the water and watch it ripple. And
Yes,
when you
exactly.
develop this excitement and this passion and you feel good and you feel energized, it's easy to have those conversations with others. And then that's going to open the door for different conversations about how can they make those changes, or how did you've lost weight, like what was the trick? There's no trick. It's intention, it's
Right.
focus, it's setting yourself up for success. So yeah, you were definitely speaking my love language.
All right.
I want to talk a little bit real quick about early and broad prevention, especially with youth. What should families be focusing on long before substance use becomes a concern?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that question. One is that prevention is so, so, so important. And with the nutrient dense food and the regular meals, a lot of what we just talked about with enabling health within the body, the mom, I mean, she's in charge of the food. And so there's quite a bit she can do to bring enabling health within the body into the whole family. And like you just said about having a family meal together, to enhance connection around the dining room table with food. And it's like I have friends now still who they don't eat together. I mean, like rarely, maybe Thanksgiving. But other than that, no one eats together. So there is a lot that, you know, the mom, I want to say, and that's stereotypical, but it's generally the moms who are in charge of the food and the home life. But I think that is very, very important. The other thing that I can say about youth is they have a developing brain. And so I mean, just through their brain development, they are looking for ways to get dopamine hits. They are curious. They want to have like the next experience. So being able to structure family life around having experiences together can be a very wonderful way to build in positive experiences. So I use the example addiction's rules of engagement. When addiction comes into your house, it's like an entity that takes over your loved one. Rules of engagement is a military term that suggests at what point do we start using force, and addiction uses force whenever it wants to, however it wants to, and it's going to over whatever. So from a prevention standpoint, families can create their own rules of engagement, how they do family together, well before there's an addiction problem. And actually, every family with kids from the age of like 9 through teenager and young adult, having a family structure goes a long way to prioritizing that structure and getting dopamine through connection with other family members early as possible. If mom and dad can do that early as possible, like if they already have a son or daughter in addiction, what I'm saying is, probably not going to be relevant because I'm talking about prevention. However, there is, lecithin, which can be put into smoothies. For instance, if someone is trying to detox marijuana, having lecithin draws the THC out of the body. It can take weeks or months for THC to be completely out of the body. But there are things like lecithin that can help accelerate that process. So there are things that can be done. I wish there was more that I could say to answer your question about prevention because it's very important.
No, I think you brought up a lot of important things there. It's, being present with your children when they're young. And we're in such a time where distraction is easier, although my childhood we were also left to kind of fend for ourselves. I was a latchkey kid. So the TV was our babysitter, or we were fending for ourselves and didn't really have that family unit.
Yeah.
Sit
Yeah.
down and have meals together as a family without distractions. Of course, we didn't have the video games, the cell phones, any of that during my childhood, but I see it now with my grandson who's 9. And knowing that my daughter has put very strong limitations on those negative distractions, and they have big conversations about the difference between what's real and what's fake, and the addictions that come from scrolling on a phone or a tablet.
Hmm.
So yesterday she's like, "Hey mom, do you have newspapers?" Knowing that my husband reads the newspaper still every day. And I said, "Yeah, of course we have, a stack of newspapers he's already read." And she's like, "Great, can I get those so that I can do a project this weekend with my grandson?" And so that to me is so wonderful to see. I never question my daughter and how she is with my grandson. I mean, they are all about family time. Every meal,
Yeah.
every evening, every weekend. They make sure that he's staying active, that he's engaged, that they're having these big conversations, that they're not shielding him or preventing him from experiencing these things, but they're educating him. Children have, like you said, developing brains, and they have this curiosity. So feed it good
Yeah.
information.
Absolutely. Yep. Right on.
So we're going to get close to kind of closing this up. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'm really loving this conversation. So for families listening right now who feel exhausted, scared, or stuck, what is the very first mindset shift that you can suggest for them to make?
Well, one thing I can say is if you, the family member, are feeling scared and stuck, if you don't make any changes, it is very likely that your addicted family member won't make any changes or can't make any changes. And so you could be giving them a gift by changing your end of the communication patterns. And so it's like even going out for a walk or taking the dog for a little bit longer walk than you normally would, or responding to something that your loved one said as opposed to that immediate reaction that comes up. Any of those play, like start in an area that you can start. Know that none of these may feel comfortable. Know that, and that's okay. If they're a little uncomfortable, that's a good stretch. And if it is like a huge, like jumping across the Grand Canyon, please reach out for help. There's many, many people who can be helpful. And I don't have to go into the long litany of it, but there are a lot of people that you can reach out to help for help. The goal here is for you to start making incremental change.
Absolutely. And even the smallest change is so important. It doesn't have to be perfect. Do it messy, but every little change, every step in the right direction is a positive change. And like you said, it may be uncomfortable because for a lot of us, it is. Something like setting boundaries can be
Yeah.
very, very difficult, very painful. But when you learn how to do it with compassion, self compassion, and compassion for others,
Yeah.
it can be such a huge change in your life and in the
So
lives of the people around you.
you mentioned boundaries, and I realize in this, I didn't say a whole lot about boundaries. And one thing that I want to say is boundaries are very helpful, and do not set a boundary that you are not willing to have a consequence that you can act on. Because with addiction, there's probably a good 90 some percent chance that you are going to have to implement that consequence. So if you set a boundary and you don't have a consequence, it's not a boundary. And know that there are incremental boundaries. You don't have to jump from A to Z immediately for it to be a boundary. And thank you very much, Leann, for mentioning boundaries. And in my world, boundaries are both to be able to set a strong boundary with addiction and stay connected to the essence of your addicted family member.
Beautifully
So,
put. Beautifully put. Thank you so much. I want to ask you just to include where people can find you. And you are also offering a wonderful free gift to our listeners. So if you could talk about those two things.
yeah, sure. So, my website is thefamilyrecoverysolution.com, and the free gift is it's this three-phase process that I talked about, three phases of enabling health, and it leads to learning more about that and having a potential conversation with me. And so the name of it is Save Your Family from Addiction in 90 Days. So I want you to know that that's not fluff marketing. It may sound like it. And what I have learned is it's very hard for people to reach out. And so I have incrementally upped what I offer. And I know that your family can create a shield in 90 days and probably less. And it's dependent on the work someone puts into it. It's like many things, you get out what you put into it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I will include all of that information in the show notes so that people know how to contact you, so that people go out and pick up that wonderful free resource so that it opens those doors for those conversations. I think it's, very valuable when we can provide that information to open those doors.
Yeah.
Jeff, this conversation is such a breath of fresh air. It was compassionate, it was grounded and deeply hopeful. And I love that we went into the science side of it. You provided amazing resources, which I will also include in the show notes so that people can learn more. Rethinking addiction reminds us that recovery doesn't happen in isolation, that families don't need more blame, they need more education, more support, and more practical tools. So, for anyone navigating addiction within their family, this episode is a powerful reminder that healing is possible and that you don't have to do it alone. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Leanne, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it. It's a great conversation.